So one of my viewers asked me if I can make a reaction to this video. It's called 11 Things Not to Do in Australia. So yeah, of course that's a very intriguing title. I don't know what sort of things you shouldn't do in Australia that you shouldn't do in any other country, but yeah, let's check it out. If you're from Australia, tell me, what should you not do in Australia? Tell me. I mean, seeing a crocodile here, you probably shouldn't go near these, but
Australia is many things. It's a continent that makes up the 6th largest country in the world and is home to some of the most dangerous creatures on the planet. And no, I'm not just talking about Australians. With a little over 8.5 million people visiting each year, tourism is a huge part of Australia's economy. That being said, there are a number of things to look out for when you're there, so let's get right into it.
This music's so loud.
Number 1. Don't stray from the path. With over 66 different venomous species, which is the 3rd largest concentration in the world, by the way, it's important to know where you are at all times. Now, this is especially true if you plan on trekking or camping in the outback, with things like the common brown snake, box jellyfish, and crocodiles. There's no shortage of dangerous animals here, so it's important that you stay on the path when you're exploring. And that goes for warning signs as well, because while it may seem funny to some people from different countries, here they're very real and should be taken seriously.
Yeah, to be honest, I think that sort of advice is not just for Australia. I think that can be applied to every country, especially if you're a visitor to another country. Like, for instance, if you go hiking here in Malaysia, of course you need to stay to the path and stay to like the kind of normal campsites and stuff. If you go into the jungle, it's going to be all sorts of animals and things there. So I feel like that sort of thing would just apply to any country, just to have common sense wherever you go, you know.
Number 2. Don't underestimate the cost. Australia is known for having one of the highest living costs in the world, and traveling there is no different. Now, of course, this is all subjective depending on where you go and where you're from, but it still might surprise you to hear that a beer costs around $9 Australian dollars, and a meal at a mid-range restaurant costs around 40. Now, all in all, if you're really trying to save money, you can get it down to around 100 Australian dollars per day. And I'll just throw that number out there as an average. But between transportation, food, and lodging, the prices can get a bit expensive. So it's important that you price out your trip accordingly.
Yeah, again, I understand that Australia has one of the highest cost of living in the world. And when I visited Australia, especially coming from Asia, from Malaysia, you can see the price disparity, and it is obviously more expensive in Australia. But these things, it depends how you want to live in your holiday or how you live while you actually live there. You know, I think like 100 Aussie dollars per day, is that a realistic amount to spend every day? Can you do it cheaper? I'm sure obviously you can do more expensive, but I'm pretty sure you could like live on cheaper and still have a good time there.
Number 3, and this is a short one. Don't say shrimp on the Barbie. Now, this phrase was popularized by a 1980s ad with Paul Hogan, who was later in Crocodile Dundee, and it was sponsored by the Australian Tourism Commission to try to bring in international travelers. But this is absolutely not what an Australian would say. If they would even use that phrase at all,
I've already learned
prawn,
before.
Not
I wouldn't do
so
it
don't
anyway.
make it more annoying than it already is.
Yeah.
Number 4. Drinking in Australia. Now, for this one, I'm mainly talking about major cities, specifically Sydney, so don't quote me on the rest of the country. But in Sydney, you can't get a beer after 1:30 in the morning because they have something called a lockout law, which means no one is allowed in or out of bars past that point in time. And their last call is at 3 in the morning. And of course, don't drink and try and drive because they have one of the lowest blood alcohol content levels, 0.05, before you can be arrested. And last but not least, don't order Foster's beer. That's not an Australian thing, that's an American thing. Instead, try and order a bottle of Bundaberg. My Aussie friends will know why I'm laughing.
Yeah, tell me what about drinking in Australia? Is it a stereotype that everybody just loves to get drunk all the time? When I went, yeah, like we had beers here and there, but it wasn't like we never went crazy or anything like that. But tell me what you think about drinking culture in Australia.
Number 5. Don't underestimate its size. Australia is a country with about 25 million people, and because it's a continent, it's made up of almost 7.6 million square kilometers. And despite the fact that the majority of its population is clustered around the coasts, in urban areas, it still means that as a tourist, it's going to take a long time to get from place to place. So it's important to take a look at exactly how long it's going to take you to complete your itinerary. Number 6. Don't always tip. Now, unlike some countries, tipping isn't required in Australia, and that's mainly because their minimum wage is the highest in the world, at around $18.93 an hour. Now, in places like the US, waitstaff require tips to earn a living wage, because the national minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Now, if you have great service, for sure you should tip the person. All I'm saying is you won't be scorned like in the US if you don't.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing I respect about Australia as well, is that they do actually pay their people well, you know, and that's why, like, it's different here in Malaysia also, because here, like, you find a lot of the sort of, like, that sort of level of staff, like waiters, waitresses and stuff, are actually foreign workers that are brought in from, like, Nepal, Pakistan, India, places like that, Sri Lanka. So it's, like, very different to the UK. UK, I think, is similar to Australia, where tipping's not mandatory, but it's always nice to give a little bit if you get good service. But I like that about Australia, that they actually pay their people well.
Don't rely on public transport. Now, because Australia is so big and so spread out, public transport is difficult to find outside major cities. You know, it's not like Europe where you can take a train to a small town, hop off, and then hop onto another train to another small town. Australia is just too big for that to be feasible. So you're better off finding other ways to get around. Number 8. Don't talk about immigration. Now, forgive me if I have to generalize a bit in order to get the point across, but for the most part, many Australians dislike the way that the government handles immigration, whether they're anti-immigration or whether they're disgusted by the way the government handles refugees. Of course, there's all the people in between, but the bottom line is that immigration is a big deal in Australia, and it's easier to avoid the topic.
I actually never knew that. I thought, like, immigration, I thought one thing about Australia that is really good is their policies on immigration. I feel like when I visited Australia, it's very multicultural, but people were living, like, harmoniously. Like, it seemed like a very positive place. Like, you know, even compared to, I've mentioned in other videos, like London or UK, where there's, like, huge, like, racial problems and stuff. Like, it seemed like a great place where everybody just got on, but I never knew you couldn't actually speak about immigration. Is that actually true? Is that like an overreaction from this content creator? What do you think about immigration? I feel like Australia is probably the one place that actually does it the best in the world. But yeah, I guess maybe nowhere's perfect. But tell me more about that.
Number 9. Don't take anything personally. Now, Australians always seem to be joking around, and insults are one of the ways that they do that. But don't make the mistake of thinking they mean anything by it. There's a funny saying where you know that an Australian doesn't like you if they don't insult you, because it means that they actually think there's something wrong with you and that it'll offend you. Go figure. So take everything with a grain of salt. Number 10. Don't be afraid to say hello. Australians have a pretty well-deserved reputation for being laid back. And like I was talking about before with the kidding around, they're good at taking things in stride, which makes it easy as a tourist to make friends. And talking to people is a must.
That's probably the main reason I like Australia, because I feel like that fits my personality. You know, I feel like I always like to, like, meet people and talk and stuff, and I find it, like, especially even just having this channel, in the comments, people are so, like, forward and so friendly and talkative, if that kind of can happen in comments and stuff. But it's like, compared to, like, most other countries, I don't think they have that kind of positivity and that openness. But that's what I love about Australia, and that's what I found when I was actually there. That's the best thing, or the thing I enjoyed the most.
Last but not least, number 11. make sure you enjoy Australia. Australia is such a cool place with so many fun and interesting people, and there's so much to do there. It's important to keep in mind that these are all general guidelines and tips that I find out while I was there. And I'm sure you'll have a fantastic time while you're there.
Every video I make, I'm just enjoying finding out more about Australia, Australian people, and this again, like, this is like things not to do in Australia. Some of them were, I guess, common sense, but things like not talking about immigration is interesting. But I guess it can be similar to like politics and religion. It can be a subject that people can find sensitive, so maybe that's why they don't want to talk about it. But for me, for Australia, I guess I can't really say anything because I'm not from there, but for me as an outsider and looking at the situation in Australia, I feel like people should be proud of how they handle immigration, because I think like they do it very well. They bring people that want to be in the country and that assimilate very well, and become proud to be Australian. But yeah, anyway, tell me what you think about all of them. Are these things that you shouldn't do? Is there any other things you shouldn't do in Australia? Tell me what you think about that video. Thanks.